Good day, guys. So we're going to look at functions in Kotlin. Now, what is function? A function is simply a block of code lumped together that performs a particular task or that carries out a particular task. So, the essence of the essence of creating a function is to put a group of codes together that is believed to do a particular, as in work together to achieve a particular aim or target. So, it's just for, should I say, to make our code more organized, right? And yes, just to put proper structure to our code so that we can actually determine how and when a particular block of code or several lines of code is actually executed. So let's just quickly look at how it works. So as usual, we'll create a new Kotlin file and then let's call this function. Let's call it Kotlin function .kt. Okay, so of course we have the main function, and then we have, so we can either create, to create a function, we can either create the function before the main function or after it. So let's call this test function, and let's just call it test. And this is a simple function that prints uh, what will it print out now? Let's say hello Android. Hello Android developer. So now let me quickly create another just to show that you can either put it before or after the main function. Let's call this display. Now the way it works is fun name of function, open curve parenthesis, then curly parenthesis or curly braces, curve braces, then curly braces. So the curve braces first, not the curly braces then curve braces. So the curve braces first, then the curly braces. So this will print, or let's call this let's call it before, and let's call this after. Okay, so before, let's say this is the function before the main. Let's just put it here. This is the function after the main. I think function has an end, so let's quickly go. So then the next thing will be, this is what we call defining a function. So defining a function. So to define a function simply means to create that function, right? So we are defining a function. Here we defined a function before the main function. Here we are defining it after a function after. So now there's defining a function, then there's calling a function. So the function has to be called in this main function. You can see the play button is for the main function, signifying that this is where we call our function. So we can call the before function, and also we can call the after function that we created, right? So both will be executed. So let's quickly wait. Okay, so we are having and this has to do with, okay, we are running in the another file that doesn't exist. So let's quickly run this. What's the name of this Kotlin function? Let's close this, delete. Okay, so what we do in order to avoid that, let's just come here and click this run Kotlin function. Okay, so you can see both of them are executed. Sorry, we are using print here. That's why we have both statements in the same line. Okay, so both of them are printed. So we can call a function before or after. So there's a way to, we can also create a now if the function is just a single line like this function, we can actually edit it, right? So we can just, all we have to do is put something. Okay. That's if the function has just one line of code, so we don't need to use the curved braces. If it's just one line of code, and that's the condition, the only condition we can with which you can do this is that the function has just one line of code. So if there's just a single line of code, then we can use this. Right, so when we run it, we are still going to have the same result. So we have the same result here. So the next thing would be to look at so let's look at parameters in a function. So what is a parameter? A parameter is a variable, right, that will put inside these curly braces. Right. I know you might be wondering what's the essence of this curved braces. You might be wondering what's the essence of this curved braces. Now, is the essence of that curved braces is to accommodate our variables or our parameters. Right. So ideally is a variable, but since it's existing inside a function, we call it a parameter, but it's still a variable. Right. So let's remove this. Let's create a proper function. Let's delete this. So let's remove this. Okay, so personally, I like to create my function after the main function, so that's just my preference. So let's call this multiply. So this function is going to multiply two values, right? So what do we do now? To Like I said, parameters are actually variables, but we put them inside. Okay, you know what? Let's just create a normal variable. Let's put it in the main function. Or better still, let's just do it this way. Val a int, which is not compulsory. It's not compulsory for us to specify that as an integer. Val b int is equals to 4. So we can say multiply a times b. If you can recall mathematics, so and let's just leave return statement for now. So it's going to multiply the two of them and print them on the screen and print them in the terminal. Yep. Multiply. So we'll come here and call the multiply function. Now I've not these are not parameters yet, because they are variables outside of a function. So they are normal variables. Right. So I just want to use this as maybe as a guide to explain parameters. So you can see the result is 12 displayed. So I can take these two guys. So instead of just putting them here, I can to do a more professional work, it's best to put the functions inside, so that we can actually determine, so that since our function is dependent on these two guys here, it will be highly recommended, right, to put both of them inside the function, so that when we are calling this function, we can now determine at that point of calling the function, we can determine these two values. Let me quickly explain what I mean. So let's quickly take these guys out. So let's put them inside. Now to put them inside, we don't need to type var or var. So what we need to do is, so ideally is a var, because the value can change depending on what we specify. And then we can say b int. Yes. So these are what we call parameters. They are parameters. They are variables inside a function. They are actually variables, but they are inside a function. So we call them parameters. So a is an integer, and b is also an integer. So and when defining parameters, we must determine. So unlike variables that we can at times we can just keep the data type and just allow Kotlin to infer. But in this case, we must specify the data type. That this is an int and this is a variable. So that's how Kotlin works. So and then since we have put them inside a when we are calling this function multiply, we must pass values. You can see that there's a red underline here that shows that you can see no value passed for parameter a, no value passed for parameter B. Because what Kotlin is simply saying is that there is no, we have not passed any values for this. And a okay, let me just quickly do that. So we can now come here and say 5 and 6. So let's quickly run this. So we are supposed to have 30, that's 5 times 6. Okay, so that's what we have here. So you can see now I did not type this A and B. Kotlin is giving me automatically. It's telling me that A is 5 and B is 6. So that takes me to the next uh, concept I want to explain. Now it's called positional arguments. Positional arguments, arguments, and keyword arguments. Now, a positional argument, let me just keep the complexity. A positional argument simply means that just the way this is, right? So this is a positional argument. So now let's assume that we have three C. Let's assume that we have three parameters here, and I want to get the product of the three. Or let's say A plus B, A times B plus C. But let me use times. It makes our code simple. Okay, so I need to pass have so A is defined as 5, B is defined as 6, but we have not passed any values for C, and we still have the red underline, so we need to pass. So we can say C is equals to 7. So this will give us the product of 5, 6, and 7. That's 5 multiplied by 6 multiplied by 7. So the answer is 210. So this is a positional argument, right? Positional argument means Colin is looking at the position to assign values. So since 5 is the first value here, sorry, let me quickly delete it because Kotlin is automatically giving me. So let's say 5, 6. Okay, it's still giving me, no problem. So Kotlin is assuming, not assuming, Kotlin is insisting or passing this, taking this value and passing it to the first value here, this second one, second value to the second parameter, third value to the third parameter. So that's what positional argument is, right? So since I am not directly telling Kotlin which one is A, B, or C, Kotlin is inferring that the first one will be A. Since A is the first parameter, then the first argument will be 5, will be for A, the second argument will be for B, third argument will be for C, right? So let me quickly chip this in. So there's argument, there's parameter. At times, people mix it up or use it interchangeably, but they are not the same, even though they speak of basically the same or essentially the same concept. Now, these are parameters and these are arguments. So parameters are the variables, are like the variables. Arguments are the values assigned to those variables. So these are the arguments and these are the parameters. So the parameters are A, B, C, and the arguments are 5, 6, 7. And the arguments we can change them anytime. Let's say 6, 7, 8. Okay. So there's an acronym I use to that helps me to remember PA, Papa. So PA, what's it called? Parameter. P stands for parameter. A stands for argument. So parameter, arguments. Parameter are the variables. Argument are the values. So that's it. Okay, so we have looked at positional arguments. So let's look at keyword arguments now. So these are positional arguments. Let me just quickly specify. Positional arguments. So then we have keyword arguments means that Kotlin is not inferring. We are directly telling Kotlin which is which keyword. But I think it's best to just go with positional arguments, keyword arguments, because it makes your code, because that's just how it's meant to be ideally. The first value should go to the first argument, second value, first argument should go to the first parameter, second argument, second parameter, third argument, third parameter. So, but in the case where we want to make it explicit, we want to explicitly rather define the arguments. So we can now come and say C is equals to 7. So we are starting with C. B is equals to, let's say A is equals to 9. And okay, let me use the same value just to confirm that. You can see the answer is 338, 336. So we'll get the same answer. C is 8, A is A is what? A is 6, and B is 7. Yeah. So let's comment this so that we don't have double. Or we can still leave it. So both of them, both this and this, will give the same answer, the same result. Okay, you can see it's the same thing. So that's that about that. Positional argument and keyword argument. So the next thing we are going to look at is let's look at return statements. Let me quickly delete this. Now, what is a return statement? A return statement in a function, what it does is that it takes it breaks a function, or it ends the function, like it causes the function rather to terminate. So it terminates a function, more like switching it off. So that's what it does. So whenever the compiler sees a return statement, it assumes that, no, not that it assumes, it actually infers or deduces that that is the end of the function. So it stops anything after the return statement will not be executed, right? So that's one. Then secondly, the return statement, as the name implies, it returns a value. So it returns it brings a particular value to back to the code or to the user that okay, let me quickly explain what it does. It sends back a value to the user. So let's say um okay, let's use the same multiply function. Multiply, right? So let's define a int, what am I doing? A int, b int. So in this case, we are, instead of using print, we are going to use a return statement. So we can say return. There are several ways to do it, right? You can say return a times b. Yes, times now times b. So now what it does is that when the compiler gets to this, oh, I think there's, what am I doing? There's an error here. Oh, okay, sorry. Now I forgot. Int. Yeah. So what the compiler does is when it gets to this point, it will stop. So anything after this will not be executed. Hello. So you can see there's a rend order line, unreachable code. So it's not going to be executed. So the compiler will stop here. It will execute every other thing before the return statement. This is okay. Sorry, let's say the code before return statement, and let's call it the code after. The code after return statement. So this will be executed because it's before the return, but this will not be executed. So when the the compiler is done with this function, it will take this result and return it back to the user, right? So we can now use it to do whatever we want to do. So we can choose to store it. It will return it back to the memory, to the computer's memory. So we can now choose to either store it or, do whatever we want to do with it. So let me quickly just show us how it works. So this is the multiply function, and then we need to pass two values, 2 and 3, right? So let's quickly run this. Now you can see only the code before return statement is a. So this is not. So let's just, everything outside the return statement is not executed. So we have 2 and 3. Now you can see 2 and 3 is not displayed or let me just comment this out. So let's just have only the return statement. Let me delete all of this and delete this as well. Yeah. So let me just go to code. Yeah, format code. Okay, so let's run this. So nothing is returned, nothing is seen rather, but a value has been returned to the computer's memory. So we can now choose, we can choose to save this. We can say result is equal to multiply. So this will now be stored in this value. So we can either print it or do whatever we want to do with it, right? So that's why return statement is important. Okay, so nothing is being displayed, but the value has been stored here. So to see it, we can now print it. This looks like a long process. I know you might be wondering, why don't we just print it for us to see? Now, printing is just to display, right? But while we print, we don't, aside from display, we are not doing any other thing, right? So the compiler just displays the result and then discard it. But in return statement, it doesn't discard it, it saves it, right? So it's kind of hanging somewhere. So we can now, just as we are doing now, we are saving it in result variable, and then we can now print out the results. Let's print out the result variable. So it's going to display the answer here. So it's being displayed. So you can see the answer multiply 2 and 3, which is 6, has been stored in result variable. Why can we store the result of this in this result variable? Because we are using a return statement. So it will return 6 to the computer's memory. Now that 6 is stored in results and result is printed out, right? So I can come here and say result. Now the reason why I can further use that, I can use the answer to carry out further calculation. I can say result times 5, right? That's the answer times 5, and I can print this. So the reason why we can do all of this is because we are using return statement. If we had used print only to display, it will just be displayed and we cannot do all of this. So we are taking the data that we got from here, that's 6, saving it here. We are using it to carry out further calculation. You can see 30. So we can use this value to do whatever we want to do. So that, why? Because it's returning, the result is being returned to the computer's memory. So that's that about return statements. And one thing about return statements is that we can have an early return. Let me just quickly explain that. Let's delete this. There's what we call early returns. So let me create an if statement. Let me put everything val number is equals to, let's say, 5. If now this is an if statement. We'll talk about if statements later. But for now, let me just show you how we can do an early return if number, okay, let's say, yeah, if number is less than 0. mm, how do we do it now? Okay, let's do it more. Let's say if let's call this, let's create a function. We call it check number, or let's put it outside. Check number, let's say number int. Yeah, number int. So if number is less than 0, sorry. All right, sorry about the interruption. So if number is less than 0, so put an early return statement here. Yeah. Return. So what is it going to return? Let's return a, now. Okay, I forgot to explain. So when we are using return statements, we specify the value here. So if it's going to return a string, that's after the curved braces, we put a colon and then the return value, more like what we are doing with variables and parameters. So we specify the return value here. So if it's returning a number, we need to specify it here. If it's going to return a string, we specify it here. So if it's returning an integer, for example, if we return an integer, it's going to flag an error because if we hover over this, it said, sorry, I'm trying to get the message. You can see type mismatch. It's saying return type enclosing to int. So what it's simply saying is that it's returning an integer, and yet we indicated that it's meant to return a string here. So that's why. So it has to return a string. So number is a negative, is negative. Number is negative. So this is a function that just checks if the number is negative or positive. So we pass in the value, whatever it is. So if it's less than zero, of course it's negative. So this is what we call early return, right? So we can come here and put the main return statement. Number is positive. Okay. So that's just, so this is what we call an early return statement. So it's going to check before executing this. It's going to check. We'll talk more about this when we get to if statements and how to use if statements in functions. But I just want you guys to see how return statements work. How we can use multiple return statements in a particular function. So let's quickly test this function. The name of the function is check number, right? Check number. So passing a value, let's pass in -5. So it's going to check if -5 is positive or negative. Okay, it's not printing. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let's save it in a variable. Let's say results is equal to check number 5. And let's print results. Print results. Okay, so let's run it. Number is negative. Okay, so let's make it positive. Let's say 6. Okay, so that's about that's what is called a an early return statement. So let's quickly comment this. So don't forget, when creating a return statement, three things we must take note. Number one, the function ends after the return statement. Now, this is the reason why the function does not totally end here is because we have put this inside the curly brackets, right? So normally, once the function sees a return, it ends, and that's what it actually does. When the number is less than zero, it's the function and it doesn't bother to check this, right? So, but so that's just the way it works. Then, secondly, a return statement returns a value that we can use. So it's returning the string here, and we are printing the string. And thirdly, too, when creating a function with a return statement, we must specify what the data that will be returned. Is it a string? Is it an integer? Is it a boolean? And when the value conflicts, there's going to be an error. So and how do we do that? Immediately after the curved bracket, we put a colon and then we specify the value of this return statement. So that's how it works. So let's just create one as final on the final note. Let's just create a function that um let's say that will calculate the let's say the area of a triangle. Area of triangle. Okay, so and it's going to return a double. Okay, so since it's going to return a double, now we have the length. Area of a triangle is half, that is 1/2 times length times breadth. So we are going to have the length. Okay, there's a, so let's just call it a len. So len will be a double, and now, Okay, let me just finish it. Then breadth. Let's call it bread. Let's call it bread. Let's just say bread. Um, BR is fine. Yeah, bread. And this will be a double. Okay. So then return. What's the returning? I think we can also put it in a bracket. So it's returning len half, that's 0.5 times len times breadth. Okay, so that's the return statement. And since length and breadth is double, so the answer will be double. So the interesting thing is, okay, let me quickly execute this. Then we'll look at why is it? Okay, sorry. Let's delete all of this. Let's have a fresh start. So area of triangle. Let's specify the length. Now, since we indicated that the parameters are doubles, so it means that we need to the argument must be double. Even if it's an integer, we need to add. It must be a decimal since we specified that it's a double here. So even if we are having a whole number as the argument, we are going to put a decimal there. We are going to make it a decimal. So 3 will now be 3.0, 2 will now be 2.0. Now there's a way to mitigate that. So I'll explain that later. But let's get the answer first. So let's store it. Now it displays the answer, but it's not showing here. So let's store this. Let's store this as answer. Let's call it val. Let's use val this time around. Answer. Answer. Yeah. So let's print answer. Print answer. Okay, this is the answer. The answer is 3 centimeter or meter square, whatever. This thing that we're using. Okay, so now in the case where now it's not going to be very convenient for, because if we are creating this function for someone else and it passes just, since he doesn't know that we have and he has whole numbers as the length and the breadth of the triangle and he passes those whole numbers, you can see there's an error there. So how do we mitigate that such that the user can either enter a double, sorry, yes, a double of course, or a decimal and a whole number. So what we do is we use the number, right? We use this number keyword. We use number keyword. So this number means that it can either be an integer, a boolean, or a float. Now, so how do we do it? Since we are collecting number and we want it to return a double, so what we do is that we convert it. So length and breadth they are number, so we convert it to double. Use the, if you can remember, dot operator to double. So that will convert the answer to a double, and the answer will be returned as a double. So I think that should work. So the answer is returned as a double, 3.0. So that's how to work with functions. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.